Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode number 47 of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. My name's Patrick Norris, and our goal today is to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. I'm so glad you're with us. In today's episode number 47, I have a conversation with my good friends, licensed marriage and family therapists Rick and Christine Presley. Our topic is living and leading through the gift of differentiation. Red Ink Revival is rooted in the foundational truths of Christ's redemption. We're admonished to integrate these truths of forgiveness, wholeness, provision, and protection into our thinking, emotions, attitudes, beliefs, instincts, and manner of life. However, for many Christians and leaders, there is a gap between God's standard of truth and our experiences, from our thoughts to our manner of life. In this episode, we provide a tool, a mental map, a psychological resource called Differentiation to help close that gap. Differentiation begins with our God-given free moral agency. Our ability to choose puts unique and full responsibility and accountability square on our individual shoulders. Yet in time, in family systems and social systems, we see people lose their sense of uniqueness, their individuality, and they become emotionally unsure of where they begin and where they end. They become enmeshed, feeling the need to please others, absorbing other people's emotional states as their own. And before long, the gift of free moral agency becomes blurred, and collateral damage begins to happen all around. From Genesis to Revelation, we see God creating a unique identity that is to be integrated into every individual's life. This identity is about our consciousness, thoughts, emotions, attitudes, beliefs, instincts, and manner of life. God distinguishes Adam from Eve. They are individual identities. Then God gives them a coupleship identity in marriage. This marriage separates them from all other couples and individuals. Then God creates the nation of Israel, another group identity that is to be separate from all others. And then finally, God creates the identity of each individual church as the 7 churches of Revelation, as well as all the epistles to individual churches. These show a unique identity of individual local churches within the larger universal church. Each categorical identity, from individuals to marriages to nations and churches, carry with it unique responsibilities and accountabilities. For individuals, we feel the personality of that person, including the boundaries and limitations of that person. For marriages and families, we begin to see and feel group personalities, spoken and unspoken rules, language, practices, and more. In nations and churches, we see very unique cultures, priorities, dreams, and even values. All this speaks to identity that is separate from others. As differentiated individuals, we can't be generous in areas of our heart and soul if we aren't empowered to choose to. Being enmeshed with others, not knowing where others' emotions begin and ours end, is the catalyst for disorder. Our order and wholeness begins with a clear differentiation from others. Until we can see who we are and who we're not, what we emotionally want to feel and what we don't want to feel, we will never be wholehearted and healthy human beings. In Matthew chapter 16, in speaking to church relationships, Jesus described the keys to the kingdom of heaven as being whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Most translations describe this as whatever you allow on earth, heaven will allow, and whatever you forbid on earth, heaven will forbid. In Matthew 18, just 2 chapters later, where this language of binding and loosing is used again, the direct communication is to injured relationships and how to restore them. Binding comes from the bounds, and bounds can be seen as boundaries. Binding and loosing, or bounds and boundaries, is actually the emphasis around differentiating yourself from other people, ultimately so you can be healthy and wholehearted, empowering you to safely lean into someone else's pain and empathy, yet without losing yourself or your convictions. In short, the kingdom of God operates from the foundation of individual identity, boundaries, or by first clarifying differentiation. I was blown away in my training as a professional in the trauma and addiction field. When we talk through what happens in the brain when relational drama is being experienced, we see people losing themselves, becoming enmeshed emotionally with other people's feelings and decisions. We become emotional victims to other people. Then we get frustrated, power up, and become reactive as a persecutor for the pressure that we're feeling from them. We may yell, use words, hurt them, or even do worse. Then we begin to really feel bad about the whole deal, which compels us to rescue and fix. This sets up us for this cycle again and again, and we begin to feel enmeshed with their emotional states and decisions until we're so fed up, again as an emotional victim to them, that we persecute again. Then we rescue again. Then we become emotionally a victim again. Well, you get it. We're on a gerbil's wheel, cycling over and over and over. The only way to get off this wheel is to return to wholeness. It is to differentiate and clarify boundaries. When we stay in this drama triad, this drama triangle of victim, persecutor, and rescuer, it is impossible to regulate our own emotional states. We'll find ourselves consistently experiencing anxiety, depression, and rage. We can appropriate God's promises, declare spiritual authority, and activate laws of faith, but the foundation of identity has to be addressed first, or our faith activations will be ineffective. It is impossible to live our identity in Christ or to live in peace, joy, and love while living enmeshed with others. When we don't know where we end and where others begin, or know what we want and feel versus what others want and feel, we cannot live in the peace of God designed for us, no matter how faith-filled we think we are. This is because we are violating a fundamental law of creation, the law of free moral agency. So today, this is why we are so excited to talk through the concepts of differentiation. It's biblical, it's psychological, and it's neurobiological. It changes you, your relationships, and your emotional health as well as your spiritual health. We have a rich conversation with Rick and Christine Presley. Not only are they two of my very favorite people, they are licensed marriage and family therapists. They are experts in grief, loss, and trauma recovery, and they have one of the most grievous and injurious stories to be told. Before becoming therapists, Rick had a secret, raging sexual addiction that began early in his youth that extended for years into their marriage. Much of his anonymous sexual experience was during his time as a pastor on staff at a church. Rick and Christine's story of recovery is one that gives hope to all, and it's episode 3 in the Red Ink Revival. All of this recovery, though, didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened by clarifying foundational principles, including first, differentiation. You're going to love this episode. But before we go into the episode, if this podcast is actually adding value to your leadership in life, please go and subscribe to it. Make comments, review for us. Let iTunes hear what it's making a difference in your life with, so we can move up on the availability and other people will hear about it more quickly. I really want to thank you for doing that. Also, go to redinkrevival.com, redink, I-N-K, revival.com, and check out everything we're up to. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, as well as all of our upcoming events, including Pastor Spouse Zoom Monthlies, where I bring top-tier church leaders and a psychologist, neuroscientist together so that we can talk through strategies, vision, tactics, and emotional disruptions, injuries, pains. It is designed to be driven by you and what you want to talk about. It is collaborative and interactive with any attenders that simply want to jump in and share kind of what's going on. It's a very fly-on-the-wall experience or a very invested experience determined by what you want. This month on Monday, November the 23rd, we'll have Pastors Jeff and Beth Jones, known by many on the Hillsong channel, and then Dr. Todd Bowman, our psychologist and neuroscientist. We'd love to have you there. Be sure to check it all out, RedInkRevival.com. Let's fire up this week's episode number 47, Living and Leading Through the Gift of Differentiation. Well, hey guys, welcome again to the Red Ink Revival Podcast. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Oh, great.
Well, today we're going to talk about something that we call differentiation. And to kind of tee it up, got a story of a pastor, church leader, who is in a team meeting, got all the staff around, and one of the leaders on the team speaks up and says, I am so excited for the future when we finally get a robust ladies ministry. Well, what happens in that moment is the pastor leader has been casting vision, thought that he established it very clearly, that we're going to actually develop all of our community around free market small groups. And this is where if some group of ladies want to get together, they can do it in a small group and maybe annually be able to have a one-off big event where all those groups come together, have a guest speaker, and so on. And he thinks he has shared that until he can't share it anymore. He thinks he sat it very strongly into, quote unquote, the policy of our vision. When he does, and this staff member says, I can't wait until we have a real robust ladies ministry, to him, he feels threatened. So we talked about emotional regulation and how there's the fight, flight, freeze that comes up in the various parts of the brain. That in that moment is experienced. And for the leader, there are two options that can happen, and this is theoretic, the story, but this pastor can do one of two things. This pastor can power up in the team meeting and make everybody know, by golly, we are never going to have a robust ladies ministry, and just shut everybody down. Which incidentally, that kind of energy and response is going to get short-term results where people in the group are going to know, don't ever say something stupid. And we don't know what stupid is yet.
Yeah.
We're not sure what that is because the person who said it probably wouldn't have thought they were stupid.
Right.
Yet, long-term, it's fear. Fear is everywhere from the top moving through the organization. Or the pastor can acknowledge, interesting that question was posed. And in emotional regulation, feel the calming of it and realize this is just a leadership opportunity. That's it. So how many of you around the table, staff, are interested in maybe a robust ladies ministry, you're interested in a robust men's ministry, and then get kind of feedback, and then be able to say, what do you mean when you say that? To get clarity of what we're talking about, and then lean back in it and say, hey guys, here's the deal. As the pastor of the church, strategically, it's going to create competition of all the happenings in our congregation if we do free market small groups and we're trying to juggle balls of these big events for ladies and men. And so I, as the pastor, have chosen that we as an organization are not, this is a fundamental principle of who we are in our DNA. We are not going to have a stereotypical traditional ladies ministry as what you have seen and known. And I want to reestablish that that's who we are and what we are about. Is there anybody that has any questions around that? Do you need any more clarity around that? So the emotions are not being discharged. All we're doing is saying, as a leader, this is who we are, this is who we're not. This is where we're going, this is not where we're going. And by doing so, there is a communication that is helpful for everybody to know what is about to take place and what's the long term of what's going to take place and what's not. Now, where differentiation comes into this story is where, as a pastor leader, when you feel that the staff might not be happy with the decision or they're feeling anxiety, now then that creates for me in feeling as a leader how I'm going to manage it. And so maybe I get passive aggressive. So as an example, one way a leader who doesn't differentiate and say, they have uncomfortable emotions, the staff is feeling intensity, or they're dealing with disappointment because maybe one of them wanted to have a robust ladies ministry. And so the pastor who is over-identifying the emotions of the staff, of their disappointment, might say, well, it'd just be good not even to deal with this. And then they go home and they throw up all over their wife. Mm-hmm. And tell their wife how stupid, how wrong, why don't they get it, all of those kind of things. But a healthy leader will say, I'm not you, you're not me. If you're in discomfort, I'm going to allow you to sit in your discomfort or your disappointment, and I can meet you there with love and grace and intimacy. But that doesn't require that I change the policy of what I believe God has set in my heart. So differentiation is that I'm not you, and what you're experiencing in disappointment does not need to be over-identified by me. Mm-hmm. I need to be compassionate about your moment, but I'm not going to live in that moment allowing the entire organization and what's best for us to be impacted by that emotion, or even of the entire group. Yeah. So when we talk about differentiation, if you wouldn't mind, share with us kind of the definition. What is it and why does it matter?
So differentiation is a really complex concept. I tell people that once you get it, you can't unget it. Like it gets inside of you, but to get there is really hard. I use this as a metaphor of if you've ever seen the arrow in the FedEx logo.
Oh, right.
There's an arrow pointing a direction in the inside the FedEx logo. Yeah. And most people who that's not been pointed out to them would never know that.
Well, yeah, I didn't know it. My dad was a pilot for him. My brother's a pilot for him. Didn't know it until one day I saw it on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you see that, and then now every time you see the FedEx logo, you see the arrow. Yeah. It's like it pops out at you. It's kind of differentiation is kind of that way. Because just in response to your story and what you're talking about, there's two ends of the spectrum in an individual's way of differentiating. One end of the spectrum is that very codependent, I got to please everyone, I've got to be something for everyone, my life is dictated by other people. My being okay is whether or not someone else is okay. If they're not okay, I'm not okay. I mean, just all those kind of codependent themes that we see pop up. And then the other end of that spectrum is being more selfish, being hardcore, being rigid, being narcissistic, being my way's the highway. Yeah. I'm not going to listen to feedback. I'm not going to receive feedback. Differentiation is in the middle. It's leaning both ways at various times, but it's because the selfish or that narcissistic part of us needs to be paid attention to, that says who I am and what I believe and what I want in life is important. But who other people are and what they need and what they want in life is also important. Mm-hmm. And differentiation and our level of differentiation is exposed when in those moments when there's a tug of war between what someone else needs and wants and what I need and want, and how well am I able to hold both at the same time?
So how do you differentiate? What does it even mean to differentiate?
I think it's one of those things that you're doing for the rest of your life. Because in spiritual language, we are always working on that place of becoming sanctified, always working on that thing of becoming more Christ-like or more godly. And, we talk in those circles that's not something you ever necessarily achieve. It's a lifetime process. You're always going to be faced with challenges and opportunities to look for the gray in this moment, to look for the word A-N-D. The look for the both and. It's both this and it's this. Those opportunities are going to be there the rest of your life, and you're going to have to choose and be mindful of what happens for me if I lean too far this way. If I lean too far towards the selfish side or the self side, then I'm probably going to maybe harm someone else.
Yeah.
But if I lean too far to the other side, then I'm probably going to harm me.
Yeah.
So how do I make a decision in this moment that holds on to me, holds on to my needs and wants, and honors the other person at the same time?
Interesting. So differentiation has the word in it, different.
Yep.
What are we making different? What is different?
Well, I am different than you. So I am moving away from being, and so I am not you. You are not me. We are two individuals. The concept is informed also by the life cycle of a child moving into becoming an adult. And you'll see children at a very young age, usually around 1.5 to 2, they start to use that word no. And what they're doing is they're stepping into and starting to differentiate. They're saying, I want to do this. I want that. I don't want you to do this for me. I want to do, whatever. And they're starting to come into an awareness that I am my own physical body. I am my own person, and you are my parent. So therefore, I get to say no, because we go through these life cycles over and over, and it's actually through parents' ability to see the bigger picture there and to kind of celebrate on some level, not directly with the child necessarily, but celebrate inside to say, wow, they're at 2 years old, they're telling me no. That's actually a really good thing.
Yeah.
That's like super exciting, because what that's going to do for them, if I can reinforce the fact that it's okay for them to want something different, but it's not necessarily okay to behave in that yucky way.
Yeah.
You're reinforcing for them in the future that they have worth and value and who they are as an individual person.
Wow.
And what they want and need in life is really important, and therefore they can stand up to someone in the future who might be wanting too much from them and say, no, that's not okay.
What we're saying is that what you are identifying as a child's sense of self, that I'm not you, you're not me, and that parentally you can lean in on that and talk about with the child, honey, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? Now, for me as a parent, I parented obedience. I parented behavior. And yet today, if I could do it over, I would be so much stronger at helping my boys grow up with emotional intelligence. And, I'm so busy, I don't have time to say, it's just, don't talk to me that way. And so I end up hindering their ability to differentiate, and potentially am developing another generation of codependence.
Yeah, because in that moment, you have a response to say, don't talk to me that way, which especially as young kids, before, maybe age 8 or 9, 10, somewhere in there, you're denying them their opportunity to understand why they're talking to you that way.
That's powerful. You're denying them the opportunity
to understand why they're talking to you that way.
Yeah.
So they don't have the language. They don't have the full spectrum of words and language and understanding of the English language or whatever language it is to understand what they're wanting, to be able to communicate that. They just say no.
Yeah. Right.
And I think because we don't have time, we're not emotionally regulated. We are hungry, tired, angry, lonely, all the halt stuff. Whatever's going on for the parent, we don't want to deal with that. And so we just knee-jerk respond and say, you can't talk to me that way, as opposed to the much harder work of slowing down, calming myself down as a parent first, and then leaning into the child and asking them questions to help them explore why they're saying no with such aggression.
Which is so powerful.
It's time consuming and it's exhausting.
Yes, emotionally exhausting for the parent.
Yeah.
So,
but in doing so, we're teaching them that what they want and need has intrinsic value. And they can ask for what they want and need, which continues to develop their sense of self, that I have worth and need.
Yes.
And then as they grow into adults, especially through their teenage years and young adult years, that they're not leaning too far into a relationship with another person, say a boyfriend or girlfriend, to give them that value.
Yeah.
They've gotten it from the fact that mom and dad said what you want and need is valuable.
Yes.
How you ask for it is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because it's all about the development of identity. And, Christians love to say my identity is in Christ. And it's like, that's a great platitude. But unless you emotionally are expressing that statement, your identity is not in Christ. You are pursuing that as a reality. But that's not true. And what I find is that a lot of people are stuck and they are not actually growing in their identity of Christ because they are unattuned to their entire emotional space. So, Christine, when we talk about differentiation, we early on in one of our first interviews talked about the backstory of the two of you, and that in your marriage, you guys have worked through addiction, you've worked through things that you weren't sure in your own identity, who you really were and where you begin, where you end. How did differentiation become a resource of strength to help you in the way that you navigated all that?
Yeah, for a long time, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was, I'm his wife, and I have labels. Like when I say labels, I think as we're growing up and we're a child, we get put in these boxes and we get labeled, and then we take on that label like as if it's our identity.
Yeah.
Like for me, it was, I'm harsh and I'm, if I can say, a bitch.
Yeah.
And that's some of the labels and the
Yeah.
fears that if I were to even tell anybody about our story, it would be like, oh, well, it's because he did these things because, and it would become my fault. And so I hid for a long time, and I just, I became really isolated because I was afraid of that.
Yeah.
That aspect of, it's kind of codependent, and yet it's not. It's a protective mechanism. For me, it was. And so for me to eventually get to where my identity was not the labels that I kept or that I believed about myself, or the negative cognitions of I don't matter. And I had to replace my I don't matters and my I'm not enough or it's all my fault negative narratives with, no, this is not about me. This is his stuff that he has to work with. And yet I can walk alongside and stand in who I am and hold this process. That for me became where differentiation was a part. That's how differentiation is a part of my story in this. And eventually also being able to set some really healthy boundaries for myself. That's a big aspect of differentiation, is to be able to say, no, I choose to have a monogamous relationship.
Yep.
You can choose whatever you want, and to give him that freedom instead of saying, no, I need you to do this. I need you to, ugh. And yet at the beginning, it was more of that. It's like, I can't exist without you. I was so other validated. I was so other, like I needed him in my life to be able to undo all of these narratives. And yet I flipped, it took a long time. It was not just like, oh, I just flipped a switch. To retrain my cognition to where I am enough. Regardless, to be able to set these boundaries, to say, hey, I choose to have a monogamous relationship. And if you choose not, I'm not powerless to that. I have choice. I can be divorced. It's not what I want, but it is a choice that I have. And it's hard. It's hard to be able to sit in that because it is scary. You don't know. You don't know. And yet I know that I'm going to be enough. I know that I'm going to be okay. I have hope in that my kids are going to be okay.
Yeah.
So as a part of our story, differentiation was a huge piece. And I don't know if it just was coincidence, but it was when I set some really good boundaries for myself and stood up for who I wanted and my goals and my values and the desires that I had, is when things started to change.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
That's sweet. That's so sweet of your story. I mean, I'm feeling, and I don't know if video catches it, but there's just a ton of emotion that is still connected to that. Because for you to have to come to this space where you know that your boundary means you're vulnerable to options you don't really want.
Yes.
right.
That is freak out space.
Yes, it is.
And yet you had the courage to do that. When we talk about boundaries, you can't really execute a healthy boundary until you know about differentiation. You have to, it's a precursor
Right.
to a healthy boundary.
Yeah.
So when people talk boundaries, if they don't first understand who they are and who they're not, it's impossible
Yes.
to build that.
Agreed.
I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you.
I really am. And I think it resonates with any of the wives that are listening, because particularly wives who are married to CEOs, marketplace leaders, or pastors,
Yeah.
they absorb so much. You know, pastors, as an example, pastors' wives don't get to live their own life. When I married Tina, she literally went from her little world in Longmont, Colorado, her church. She was a Sunday school teacher at grade school for years and years. She had a banking job. She just had her community, and that was it. And then I come in. We get married December 14th, and immediately load up we'd have a couple of days of honeymoon, immediately load up the U-Haul, and we move to Tulsa. And she becomes a part of Patrick Norris Ministries, and she is meeting all these pastors and pastors' wives for which I was a guest speaker, and she knows none of them. She leaves her whole world and then adopts my world. Well, then you fast forward to Life Point Church. She's the pastor of a church. Where's her identity? Where's her power? Where does that begin? Where does that end? When does she get to have her area that she doesn't have to be concerned about what I'm thinking or doing? And she's married to the pastor.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to be under the pastor's authority. It's another thing to be married to the pastor. How easy it is to lose your sense of self and voice. Right. So when you think about how you were processing towards finding your voice, what'd you do? How did you find it? Is it reading books? What'd you do to even get back to ground zero?
Well, I think for me it was community. It was walking with other people who knew me, knew my heart, knew me, even though I had these labels or negative cognitions, but they were able to speak truth into my life. Trying to think what else. At that time, we went through a seminar, an experiential seminar that was very powerful for me to be able to immerse myself, not only to experience this seminar, but then I became a training assistant and I just kept going and kept going and kept going because I felt such life there, and I knew there was such dissonance inside of me that it's almost like just that soaking in of that, to be able to redefine who I am and believe who I was, instead of, it's my fault, or it's my fault again, or, that I'm just not good enough or not enough. And eventually it eventually just clicked. I mean, it was like, I'm done. I am, this is the way it is. My kids don't deserve this. I don't deserve this. So either get it together or I'm done.
Yeah.
And it was,
So let's move from that.
yeah.
Because that's a big item.
Yeah.
That's, you're navigating addiction. But now let's go to everyday life, where there's conversations in the marriage, and you have some kind of a rub, a disagreement that is disappointing. And when you have that, with this background neurobiologically of that, I'm at fault, it's my fault, is there conversations you're having where you're saying, help me out with this because I'm feeling like it's my fault, but I rationally don't believe it's my fault? How do you navigate all that?
I think you just talk about it. We have had many conversations where we'll talk about something and I'm like, this is not my fault. it's almost like I'm fighting. It's almost like this fight against the narrative, because it wants to seep back in. It's familiar. I'm 47, and it's just been in the last, 10 years. So I had many years of what wires together neurobiologically.
Yes.
And yes, I've done some trauma work, and yet that it's still as familiar.
Yeah.
And so being able to say, whoa, something is, I'm feeling this, and I don't like the way that feels.
Yeah.
And so I push back against it. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm just terrible. I missed it, or it's my fault. It's a challenge. It's a challenge because I do think that the enemy is roaming about seeking to kill, steal, and destroy.
Yes.
And I think his method is to get into our thoughts. And if he can isolate, and if he can get me alone and with my own thoughts, we can just live in that. I can live in that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. When I'm in my right thinking brain and rational ability to everything's great and I can focus it out and think it out, that's a no-brainer. But when I'm in this a trigger or any of those, it's sometimes really hard to stand firm on, no, this is who I am.
Yeah. When we go back to, this idea of differentiation and specifically y'all's marriage, when Christine holds her ground, when she says, this is who I am, and you don't want that to be who she is, right?
Because I want her to be the victim.
You want her to be the victim.
Yeah.
And it's not a conscious.
Right.
So how do you manage that for you when she's holding her ground on something? How is it that you are making her feel safe, and what would be ideal to make her feel safe, and yet at the same time you're still communicating what you want and who you are? You have empathy, but you are taking care of you.
Yeah. So I just had 2 sessions back to back today that kind of touched on this a little bit. And what's important is both people in a relationship are for it to go well, both people have to be differentiating. Because one of the things that differentiation gives is a permission for me not to come into full agreement with you.
Permission to not come into full agreement. I like that.
Because I'm different than you are, your thoughts and feelings are not the same as my thoughts and feelings. And we have to together give each other permission to not have the same thoughts and feelings. So when we can start there, which that's kind of exposing our level of differentiation in and of itself, but when we can start there, then now we can move into, I can respond to something that's maybe a trigger for her that I didn't intentionally do. She's perceiving something that's making her feel fearful or afraid, or sad or whatever, and I didn't necessarily do that, but I can lean in towards her and love her really well, and I can validate those experiences, I can validate those emotions, I can empathize with her, and we can kind of resonate emotionally together. But I don't have to come into a place where it says, yes, I know I did that, and I know that that caused you that pain, and kind of like lose my sense of self, because I need to stay here on some level and validate myself that I didn't mean to do that. I'm not a bad person.
Yes.
I'm not intrinsically bad because I did something that triggered her.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay. I have value. I did not mean to do that. And so what that does is it keeps shame from popping up.
Yes.
It keeps my own shame, because if I can't validate myself, if I can't soothe myself, if I can't say that wasn't my intention and love myself in that, then shame's going to rise up and say, you're a piece of crap.
Yeah.
See, you did it again.
Yeah.
Which that's the story of my life is, see, you did it again. You disappointed, you hurt somebody again. And so my level of differentiation is able to calm that down, but yet I can show her lots of love and lots of tenderness and acceptance that she had a different experience than what was my intention.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So let's now move it to a more distinct power differential. Mm-hmm. So let's say that it's a leader, and a leader has a staff member or a volunteer, and we have this differentiation that's in the grays. I want to have empathy for what they want, mm-hmm. but I also have to take care of not only self now, I have to take care of an entire organization. And it can be harsh to know that somebody's going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how does a leader differentiate? It could be a staff member of any marketplace organization who comes in and says, look, I'm going to need a raise. And the leader knowing that's not going to be able to happen here. There are some people who are leaders who seem to be able to navigate those emotional stress points much better. They're able to be like, nope, can't do it. And they never have another thought about it. That wasn't me. That's not how I am. Mm-hmm. How I am is if somebody's disappointed, I'm struggling with the disappointment because you have that undertow of fear of rejection and abandonment. And so in a situation of a leader working with the staff, a volunteer, giving them things that they want that may not be aligned with the mission or the vision of the church, and yet, you have all that there. How are you going to coach? Let's say you have a client mm-hmm. and it's that guy mm-hmm. or that lady. How are you going to coach that person in differentiation?
Well, I'd first probably take them through some of the things we've already talked about with emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, and all that kind of stuff, to be able to know self, to know what am I feeling, what is going on for me. But then I would probably challenge them on how important is it that you need this guy to still like you when you tell him you can't give him a raise? How important is, how reactionary or how much fear does that bring that up to say, you know what, if you tell the staff guy that you can't give him a raise, he might get pissed and get another job and leave, and now you got to find a different person. That's not a fun experience to go through. So how much of your identity, how much of your self-worth, how much of your ability to be a great pastor is wrapped up in making this guy like you?
Yeah.
Like that right there is exposing your differentiation to say, who are you as a person? Who are you as a leader? What is important for you? What's important for the church?
Yeah.
And how is that getting all mixed up in this emotional response to needing this guy to like you?
Yeah.
I want to have a good relationship with this guy. I want to have a good relationship and working relationship with a staff member, but I don't need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need it for my self-worth. I don't need it for my sense of self.
Yeah.
For him to come towards me. So, and what that does is it also emotionally changes the whole dynamic of now that interaction that's going to come up.
Yep.
Because when you don't need that guy to be okay with you, you don't need him to like you, Or on the other end of that spectrum too, you're not being super selfish and just dominant and rigid.
Yeah.
That gives you that emotional space to walk into that setting with this guy and, man, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is hard.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine what, me telling you that I can't give you this raise it means for you. You might have to leave. You might have to find something else for your family. And that makes me super sad. But it's also true that we can't give you the raise. Like, both are true.
Yeah.
And I can handle the emotional yuck that happens in that moment when both of those truths are sitting together at the same time.
Yeah. One of the things that you are saying there that I think is interesting, and I'm looking, kind of for the nuances, is that as a church attender and a volunteer who puts the signs out every Friday or cleans the building on Saturdays, that is giving themselves to, large amounts of time. And then they're telling, the pastor what are some desires they have that they really feel like they need. And if the pastor differentiates there can be a fear that now this person's not going to feel like they're valuable. If I come at them with this kind of "you're expendable," and I'm going to be okay. I'm okay if you're not here.
Right.
That can communicate to them they're not valuable, and can communicate even to yourself that you're all about the organization. This is an area that I've had to navigate, because you gave a great illustration of, the guy asking for a raise, and then you can say back is, gosh, I can't imagine what it's like for you to be under the pressure you're under. So the value doesn't have to be in the organizational decision. This is something that, again, helps me. The value is in their humanity,
right.
is being able to lean back into them and being able to say, I'm experiencing, you're really disappointed about this. Gosh, let's talk about that. Because truly, their disappointment isn't about the decision. It's about a lifetime of pains, losses, griefs, and sorrows, traumas that they've experienced, that right now their identity somehow is connected to this. And you're not going to fix that by just being ultra encouraging.
Yeah.
By meeting them in their pain and saying, you seem to be, I'm experiencing that you're really disappointed. Gosh, I just want you to know this is not about whether I love you. And I want to breathe in with you the pain of what you're feeling. What are you feeling right now? Yeah. Now then they feel intensely valued, which moves it out of, whether the decision did it or not. Christine, is there anything you'd add around the idea of, you have a client that's coming in and they're a leader and they're trying to do a better job of leading, whether it's in the home, whether it is in the marketplace, or the school, PTA, wherever they're leading. What are you going to help them around differentiation when they're feeling, like everybody's judging me and they're dysregulated from that? How are you going to help them?
Yeah, I think I would. I can't help but see the negative cognitions in people's stories and in the things that they do. And so we would identify what those are, and we'd attack those and potentially shift them as best we can, as fast as we can, so that they are not being other validated or undifferentiated in their leadership role, but they're able to hold both, as we talked about earlier. And when they can hold both, holding both is understanding just what you guys talked about a minute ago, holding the relationship as well as holding the leadership role, and holding them both at the same time and doing them both with excellence.
Yeah.
I think that's such a key component to differentiation, is that holding both, that there are two opposing truths existing at the same time, and both are right. And my ability to tolerate the anxiety that shows up when these two opposing truths are existing at the same time creates an immense amount of anxiety and pressure and stress. And my ability to hold both of those really is exposing my level of differentiation.
That's interesting.
Because a lot of times the anxiety that we feel in response to the anxiety that the other person is experiencing is what keeps us from being differentiated in a situation. So again, we feel anxiety about their response,
Yes.
the other's response. But if we can hold that and also self-soothe the anxiety that we're feeling, we're really able to hold both at the same time.
It's so real. That is so real. And it really goes back. One of the phrases you were talking about, cognition, is a major step of differentiation is learning to calm the inner critic and learning how to soothe yourself. Because often when we're anxious about what other people are thinking or feeling towards us, they don't even have us on their mind.
Right.
It's the inner critic that's just yelling, and we think everybody hears that voice and they want to say it as well. And, it's one thing when somebody's going to be disappointed, and that's as far as it goes. Sometimes, particularly in church leadership, you will find a narcissistic personality who will come in, and when a narcissist comes into an environment, first thing they're going to do is begin to pull apart and pick apart in criticisms simple things. So in a therapist's world, when a narcissist comes into your office, before they really sit down to get anything, they're telling you how you didn't decorate your office right. and then they're going to criticize your therapy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so for a pastor, that for me, I'll say me, when somebody criticizes my ministry to them, I'm loving them. I gave up an hour with my family to be with them. And then they're criticizing me because somehow or other they don't like the way that I'm approaching them. Used to, because of the codependency thing, I would over-identify with their emotions,
Right.
Yeah. Right.
and then I'd power up to fight it. Whereas what I've learned by being around you guys and other professionals is that if I can differentiate, I can help them. Because by differentiating, when they're saying that, I can stay soothed and calm and be able to lean back in on them and say, I'm experiencing that you're feeling power from criticizing things like my office. Do you feel like that's what's happening in you? And begin to work towards their emotional inner world. And of course, if it's a classical narcissist, you're just barely scraping the first inch of paint. But if there's somebody who just has never thought about it, because usually when people are attacking you in your style, it's because there's a lot of trauma and wounds in their own life,
Right.
and they're so in pain, they're not feeling loved and heard, and known. So if you can offer them, not only do I see you, you're struggling right now, there's some pain going on in you, without it labeling them or making them feel less than because of the way you're saying it. So I just think that it's so interesting how differentiation plays such a role in our life. And when we're kids, you said it earlier, when we're kids, little kids, we adopt the values of our parents, we adopt the beliefs of our parents, we adopt the ideals of our parents, and somewhere along the line, there is this come to Jesus moment of, what are my values?
Right.
What do I believe?
Yeah.
And until we get there, we're never going to be able to recognize these psychological defenses that we have used over our lives to try to help us survive and not be rejected. And when distress is there, that stuff comes alive. So how would you break this cycle? Is there any key tools, any key strategies that can help us to really root in differentiation?
I think shining the light on fear, shining the light on the shame. What are the fears that are coming up? I know, just
good.
for an example, in the work that I do, I see partners. I work with partners and spouses where there's been betrayal trauma or infidelity, and I have to be really differentiated in my role as a therapist and what I do, because what I'm doing most is empowering the partners. I'm empowering the spouses to create boundaries, to create differentiation in themselves. And I have at times been undifferentiated and other validated, where the addict, the one that's struggling with the problematic sexual behavior, is like, well, Christine this and Christine that, and she's just this and she's just feeding you, and knowing who I am and what I'm doing with these women, I have to stand in that. And so and then in the addict or the problematic sexual behavior person, understanding that their response is not really an attack against me.
Yes.
It's really a fear of something in their life is going to be seen, or their shame that's creeping in, or they're losing control, or they're losing power, or they're losing something.
Yeah.
And so shining a light, helping my own brain even to look and see what is actually happening.
Yes.
Look beyond the behavior.
Yeah.
Is really kind of what I'm
absolutely.
saying.
Yeah.
Looking beyond the behavior and seeing, like, what's really going on back there?
Yeah.
There's something. What are you afraid of? What is the threat that's present?
Yeah.
And if I get that opportunity, what does it cost you to keep acting the way you're acting?
Yeah.
So,
I think that that's what the Bible means when it says we don't fight against flesh and blood or people, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, this world, spiritual wickedness in heavenly places.
Yeah.
We so often, I know for me, I grew up thinking that these were all external demonic happenings, that's what I'm warring against. The whole armor of God, for which that is talked about, the whole armor of God is an emotional identity of various pieces of understanding. Like, if I understand righteousness, it's a breastplate that protects my heart. It calms me because I don't any longer have to chase validation. God has made me righteous as a gift. He loves me. He likes me. He's for me. I've got shoes of peace on where nothing's broken, nothing's missing. Jesus provided it in redemption. So what the enemy's doing with his fiery dart, which the fiery dart is a particular weapon in the Roman arsenal that had a combustible tip. It was an arrow that when it hit, it would explode. Fire in the Bible is always metaphoric to intensity of emotion. These principalities and powers, what they're doing is they are exploiting the emotional traumas, losses, griefs of people's lives. And until a person re-identifies emotionally with what Jesus did with all these parts of the armor, they will always be killed, stealed from, and destroyed. And so when somebody is coming at us, or when somebody's barking, like, the client, their addicted partner, the one that's acting out, when that addicted partner is just firing off accusations at you as the therapist, and she's just this and she's just that, when we realize that the enemy is exploiting their backstories, it's so much easier now to have compassion.
sure.
And to be able to pray for them and care about them. And so let's move that to a leadership role. If you lead anything and you're any good at leading anything, you're going to be the target of a bunch of people who don't like you.
Right.
And for a leader to be able to know that all the things that people are saying is really about their backstory.
Yeah.
It's not about you. But good organizational, tactical feedback is very important because some of the things they're saying could be true.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
It's true.
It's the intensity of what they're saying. It's the intensity of the emotion they're presenting when they're saying it. That oftentimes is what that backstory is feeding. What they're saying, there may be a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
And that again is that place of balance of saying, okay, here's me, this is what I think and want and feel, and this is what they are saying, and my differentiation is going to show up when I allow them to have feedback in my life. When I don't give in to them carte blanche, just say whatever they say is truth, but I don't fully also then on the other side reject everything that they're saying.
Yeah.
But I allow that to come in, I take the time, I slow down, and I sift it out And I say, where's the truth in this?
Yes.
That's holding me and them at the same time, and coming to what do I need to learn from this?
This is a great example of differentiation because you're in that gray area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so. When you are in that space and you are getting feedback. So for me, who again profiled as a codependent leader, what I would do when I would get those kind of criticisms, it was so hard for me to separate my emotional needs from good, rational, cognitive thought. Because they were all enmeshed together. Those two were there.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm rejecting the emotion is what I'm internally processing.
Right.
I'm rejecting the emotion, and I don't know how to reject the emotion without rejecting the data.
Yep.
And again, you got to separate those to say, one's cognitive, it's either true or not, and we may not know. And as leaders, when we need so badly to be right, to emotionally be accepted, we live in constant torment.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But if we're like, and this is a learning that I'm 55. That's what I am. I'm double fives. And at 55, over 30 years of senior leadership ministry, this is what I've learned, is that you can have one pastor or leader, some executive, that they do something that is fully aligned from the inside. They are aligned with their values, their beliefs. They're aligned with their way of expressing love, and et cetera. And they will do something in strategy that is 100% different than another pastor who's fully aligned inside themselves.
Right.
And then we hear the story at a conference and we're like, whoever we heard tell the story, they're the right one. Do it their way. And it's like what I would say today is be aligned with you
Right.
before God. And there isn't one way that's right and one way that's wrong often in leadership. So what we're really kind of screwing down hard on to be like, I don't want to make a mistake. It's like, really? If you're aligned, if you'll be aligned, there is no mistake.
Yeah.
There's more than one way to do this thing.
Sure.
And so differentiation is the beginning of even being able to do that.
I tell my clients that the starting place for differentiation and just the mental kind of putting, where do I go with this? At the end of today, when you take an honest assessment of yourself, are you going to like what you see in the mirror?
Yeah.
Like, I think being well differentiated is living out of your integrity. It informs everything that we do. To say, when I take an honest assessment of this decision I made, this interaction that I had with a person, this conflict that I had and how I did that, can I look at myself and go, I did that really well.
Yeah.
My integrity was held together all the way through that. Because you're not going to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and go, I did that conflict really well, when you got big and yelled and screamed at them.
Yes.
You just
That's
can't.
real.
I mean, not when you're truly taking an honest assessment of yourself.
That's real.
You can't. You just can't. I mean, I guess, if you're a sociopath or narcissist, you could say, I don't really care about anybody else. But I think most people can't do that. But you also aren't going to be able to truly take an honest assessment of yourself. And if you gave yourself away at every turn and you just denied your values, you denied your sense of self, you denied who you are, you weren't congruent with yourself.
Which is so amazing. So integrity, as you're using the word, is really about it being integrated. It's where you're aligned. And to be aligned. So here's Jesus' greatest commandment. This is Jesus saying, this is the most important. If what you do is aligned with my love for God and receiving his love for me, and then my love of myself, I'm kind and compassionate and empathetic to myself, I'm that way in my flaws and imperfections. So even if I said something that wasn't right, even if I approach something in a way that I tomorrow would have grown from and say it differently, if I can look at myself and say, you know what, I love me and my heart was right. My heart was right in loving people, third. I want to love people. And I thought what I was doing was best for the organization. It was best for the kingdom of God. It was best for of how I could love others, and yet I'm also loving myself in that. All of a sudden, the alignment of that, you can't make a bad decision long term, because it's that kind of integrity that's allowing you to actually live the full life. So as a leader, my encouragement to leaders are, gosh, if you'll be true to yourself before God and love your neighbor and everything through that lens, and as soon as you blow it by getting angry at people and expressing it, it's hard to come back from that quickly. So if you can regulate, which all this gets back to differentiation, emotional regulation, and then the power of loving yourself. Because the inner critic, when you ask that question of, am I proud of what I did today? If you haven't learned to manage the inner critic, you're still going to live in a cycle of confusion. Right. But if you have emotional regulation, differentiation, and you are in self-compassion and affection, it's the groundwork for amazing leadership. Thank you for joining us. You might be wondering what's next. Well, consider attending one of our special online events at Red Ink Revival. Also, subscribe to this podcast at any podcast provider, and of course you see the video on YouTube. Go to redinkrrevival.com to find out all the unique opportunities to grow your life in leadership. While you're at our website, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post and then a lot of happenings at Red Ink Revival. Everything we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our Red Ink Revival tribe. I can't wait till our next episode, and I'm glad that you're with us today. We'll see you next time.